see, I was telling y'all earlier that I use bolts. Well, damn. Use those to screw into the block instead of having studs. Well, I just made me some studs, a little bit longer than factory and more common size of a wrench. Anyway, I can carry around less tools in my box. But this is the top ring, and the top ring has that keyway on it, or that little line, whatever you want to call it, for lining the piston ring up. It can't be over but so far. Well, let me make sure it's within tolerance, and it is. No problems there. I can see we're using just one ring. Has a little bit of blow by right there in that ring gap, but it's not too bad. I'm not worried about that ring anymore. And I do have an extra cylinder if all goes bad. So, for installation, just make sure she's good and clean. Mating surfaces are good and clean. Okay. Then let's flip her over. Get her started. And squeeze the piston together with your fingertips. You can squeeze and jiggle up, and now she's in there. Get her down in those base gaskets fairly good. I would take another rag and just wipe down this head gasket mating surface. Make sure you get no debris down in that cylinder. Oh. And as for my head, I've got it shaved a lot right down there. It's not completely flat like the high comp heads, but it's just a little bit. Try to get a little more low end on it without sacrificing too much, but anyhow, go ahead and put her back in. Make sure its mating surface is good and clean. And you can see the piston before. No, I'm not going to do it. My carburetor. Let me go ahead and put her back on. And I will be able to. Now if I don't tighten it down now, I'll forget all about it. Get your carburetor float bowl bottom nice and level, parallel with the ground. So I got that on. And get my exhaust out of the way, and you'll be able to see that piston. But I wouldn't recommend doing that for so much. And also, well, I've got my 2-cycle oil. Prop my phone up so we can continue watching these videos, so I'm not going to mess with that. Just doing it one time without any oil. I've had this or done this numerous times, so it doesn't hurt anything. Especially if you know it's going to actually start up. And here's a little trick I've learned for lining these little washers up along with the nuts on those studs. Just the end of a pin. Slide your washer on it. Come over here and take a peek down at your stud. Got one. Two. Whoops. Three. Go on, motherfucker. Son of a... Excuse me. I have a mouth. A mouth. I know. I bet y'all love my accent too. I'm a country fried mopeder. like to go with just a short or a shallow 11mm 6-point. I put my studs on, or my nuts on each stud that they came off of, just to keep anything, because these studs are so easy to strip. Just get that on finger tight. Never start these with a socket wrench. Actual wrench. Don't start them that way. Always start them with your fingers. You can get a feel for them starting. And before you even touch this extension or socket with a wrench at all, deep down in there and make sure all your nuts are snug against the head. Because I stripped one off and had to ride halfway across town with one cylinder stud missing to go and pick another one up. That's no fun. Didn't know what was going to happen. So I'm peeking over. Got them all four started good. Then I put my deep wheel 11 on there. Ratchet wrench for tighten. Always crisscross pattern. Fairly snug. Fairly snug. Got me scared. Fairly snug. Fairly snug. Now go around, tighten a little bit, tighten a little bit, tighten a little bit, tighten a little bit. And I roughly know about what 10 foot-pounds of torque feels like. So I'd recommend using a torque wrench if you ever do this. 2, 3, 4. Spark plug wire back on. Now, this ought to be, this is a new part for me. Because I've gone away with my engine screws and I went to studs, or exhaust studs, excuse me. So let me see. Probably should have checked it out and make sure it would actually work first. Yes, that's the way I like it. Yep, I must say, I do like the studs quite a bit better. Knock on wood. Still ain't snugged them down. I did tighten them into the block though. Actually, pretty much work is the same. Review. One touching. Something I didn't quite count on. Damn, man. So, it's a 10mm nut, not that big, but it is big enough to keep the end of my socket from sliding. The exhaust hits the side of the nut, so I can't use socket wrench on that particular one. So that's always going to be a drawback. Plus I can get an extra socket and wobble it down on one side. Oh, this is going to piss me off. There we go. Excuse me, I can use the socket. Just gotta go in just a little cockeyed. Well, it's not the tightest, but just for video purposes, I'm going to go ahead and start her back up. I tightened it down, fuel on. I like to twist it a couple times. One kick. Still has that annoying vibration. There's a metal vibration. It's not in my clutches. I've got clutch bell balance. I've got shims in the rattle spring in the clutch. I've seen the copper YouTube video, but there's still just some. There's some smoke. There's an exhaust leak or an air leak. Yeah, it's right out of the muffler. I'm going to do a little modification on the muffler and get it where I can use those nuts with it and ground down a socket especially for it. So anyway, at least that way you learned how to remove and install a Tomos A35 cylinder.